Well, I mean, I didn't even stop and say like any of the initial stuff. Like, first of all, thank you for joining. I think it's hilarious we're having this conversation too, because in the past, like I remember back on YouTube, like we were butting heads like two billy goats, like back and forth.
Talk about that in the beginning of the recording. Get it rolling.
Oh yes, definitely.
Awesome.
Hey everybody on YouTube, I'm really excited about this video. So we actually have a special guest. His name is Michael is it Perrigo or Perrigo?
Perrigo, you had to write the first.
Perrigo, perfect. So you're a game developer within the Christian game developing world, aren't you?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about yourself real quick.
Where to start? I'm a indie game developer out of Florida. I want to create games that glorify God with a discipleship focus. And I want to do so in media that is, straddling the line between for and from the church. And I want it to be based in a sci-fi and fantasy universe. So that's really important to me to kind of explore this creativity in a less traditional way.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I was kind of saying this before the scenes, before we get into the actual discussion of what this video is. It's hilarious that me and Michael are actually having this discussion, because me and you have not seen eye to eye on things in the past at all. And that's we're starting kind of this almost podcast approach within Monkastery Studios, and this is the first one. And to me, it's a good thing that we can start having discussions with people we don't necessarily see eye to eye with, but we can ultimately we might argue back and forth, but we agree that we want to use media to glorify God. Like, I'm going to throw some comments on the screen. Like, here's some of the things that we've said back and forth to each other. Like,
I don't know if I said this in my best wisdom, so we'll see.
I just think they're hilarious looking back. And now we're able to just have a peaceful, friendly conversation. So that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
So the discussion in this video is really what I've wanted to have for a while about. And this is based on some discussions I've had with people personally, knowing people who are like this personally. I do want to preface by saying, obviously, not all Christians are going to view entertainment the same way. And that's a given just by the fact me and you are having this conversation.
Sure.
But I really do want to come against the whole mindset that Christians should avoid entertainment because it's worldly, because it's carnal. And like the Christians, you say inherently, in and of itself, entertainment is worldly and carnal and cannot be used by the church. What are your initial thoughts to that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that there has been an aversion to it for decades. And I think there's an abundance of caution that's exercised almost to a fault. And exploring how we can be a part of culture, but not be of it, right? To be in it, but not of it. I think that a lot of people would just kind of say that's a little taboo. That's a little towards the guard lines. Let's back up a little bit and let's just be too careful. But in doing so, I think we miss a prime opportunity to minister to others. And honestly, the people that most art that Christians make is for isn't even going to reach the lost, right? So I think we both talk about this a lot in separate circles. There's art for the church and art from the church. And the former is created and usually has a gospel focus. It's Bible trivia. It's things like that. And the latter, that's honestly where the line gets very blurry when you start to cross over into the latter. And honestly, I've seen and studied intensely Christian hip hop and all of these figures who are in the public, like Lecrae and the rest of the 116 clique, over the last decade. And I've seen them argue back and forth about this. I've seen discourse occur between them. I've seen them mend it. I've seen them not mend it. I've seen them create
to the point that KB just left Reach Records, right?
Yeah, he joined Sony.
Yeah.
And then you heard about Shylin and putting out a diss track. And it's like,
yes.
Did you call them first? There's this whole universe of stuff that's happening that the Christian game developers and creative Christians can pull from to kind of construct the narrative within our circle. And so that we can overcome these situations. And ultimately make something that glorifies God and brings unity to the community, to the church body.
And I think what's really sad to see is that in the past, Christians were at the head of virtually all art forms. You have, like in the days of painters and sculptors, you had figures like Leonardo da Vinci, you had Michelangelo, Raphael, you had in music, Mozart and Bach, and different figures like this. And it really over time, well, even this is something I just learned recently. If you go back to the early days of the film industry, one of the first film production studios, it was called Limelight, the Limelight Department, was founded by the Salvation Army. Yeah. And it was one of the biggest film production studios of its time. And they used that to kind of lure people in and then present a gospel message. And so, and I would say in almost every art form, Christians originally in days past led these art forms. And it's like over time, Christians have developed this mentality, well, we'll let the world take care of its own. We're going to retreat to our corner and we're going to, focus on church ministry.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the fact that Christians used to lead every art form. And I think it's because we see the beauty in God's creation and we overflow with an abundance to shout that from the rooftops, right? That's the gospel, right?
Yep.
However, I think when, those who are of the world, those who are non-believers, they see it just like scripture, it becomes twisted, it becomes infected with sin, right? And I think we have to be very careful as creative Christians not to intertwine culture and sin because they are not one and the same.
Yeah.
Too many times we see, don't be a part of culture as partaking in sin. But ultimately, everything is an expression of something that, God created. And sin is just the thing that twists that. So culture exists separate from sin. And we have to make sure that we lead godly lives and still indulge in what it means to be able to speak to people eye to eye like we're doing now in their language.
Yep. So here's a very controversial question. And let's just dive into it head first. You might get death threats after answering this question, but
I left my
just kidding.
Walkers over there. I can't reach them.
So, in your opinion, when a Christian is trying to create, whether it's a song, whether it's a video game, or whether it's a movie, can you minister and present the gospel of Christ in a manner without explicitly mentioning the name Jesus or Christ inside of that project?
Absolutely. And people who say you can't, I think that's I'll just put it this way. There are different levels of maturity in our walk and in our faith. And when I see people who say you can't minister without explicitly stating Jesus' name, I think that they are just, very young in their faith. They're not really deep into scripture. They don't understand that God's character permeates everything. It's not just the name that was given to him by us, right? And I'm not a universalist. I'm just saying, the name Christ, it's a title actually. And, God and Yahweh, all these things are given names because through history, man has given names to things to describe it in the only words they knew how to. So we do that with God. He hasn't revealed his actual name to us. And, you go anywhere in the world and you see a different name for the Christian God just because of the language change or something like that, right?
Yeah, and I think you do have to be careful with discussions like this because you can get into an area where it's overly ambiguous. Well, anything that people call God, you deal with the whole coexist movement. Anything that you call God has to be one and of the same. And it's obviously not. Different people have different views on that. I definitely personally do not see that as one all in the same. But I do believe that you can minister. Go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a danger in that because universalism, like saying that there's one God that everyone worships.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that they're worshiping the different God because the God that they're worshiping has different characteristics.
Yep.
And that's where you really have to focus. Who is God? God is love, sure. And then you have the left come in and say, oh, just love. But God is also justice.
Yeah.
And he's all of these other things. And many of the names he's known by are because they describe his characteristics. So we have to make sure that the God that we're proclaiming, it is identical to the God of the Bible.
Right. And I do have one disagreement so far with one of the things you said. And I'll just throw that out without us arguing and hassling it over it. And, I don't want to create a disagreement of any sort, but just for those people who might see differently, you did say that God hasn't necessarily revealed his name to us. I do personally believe, and some other people watching this may believe, that the name of God is revealed through the name of Jesus Christ. But, yes. And obviously the power, if there is a name that has the power to cast out demons in the New Testament, and even as I personally believe in the modern day, then obviously that is the name God has revealed to us. But,
well, hold on.
Yeah,
go ahead. I just want to state that is a good point. I mean, that name, in the cultural time when it was given, I'm not sure. I didn't really look into like if that was what the angel said to call him. I think it was, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that is actually a given name. You're right. So
right, and of course it does. You can look at it from the angle of, well, it really, Jesus is actually just a form of the word Joshua and so forth. But yeah, that's a big old monkey trap. A big old, what did they say? Rabbit hunt. What they say?
Yeah, all good.
But
later.
I got this image of almost an example to get back to the original question of the mindset that you have to explicitly mention Jesus for it to be a Christian content. I got like this mental example of my church does a type of soup kitchen, and we'll go out and pass out food to people that are in need and so forth. I think viewing it from the angle that it has to explicitly say Jesus is like, you say the mindset, well, we have to cut the sandwiches in cross shapes or they won't get the message. And it's kind of like that mindset, but it's not about so much what you're giving them. It's the testimony that you give through that. And that's what I personally believe, whether or not it explicitly mentions God, the biggest tool you have to win those souls is through the testimony that you couple with it. So for example, like I said before, Limelight Department from the Salvation Army, they would display films that had nothing to do with Christianity. And people were just blown away by this new novel invention, and they would come view these films that had nothing to do with Christianity. Like, some of them would just be like trains driving by, and people would just flock to watch them.
Right.
But after that film display, they would use that opportunity to share the gospel of Christ. And then you also have, if anything has happened in the 21st century, it's the introduction of platforms, is that these people who are artists or filmmakers or game developers, they have platforms they never had in the past where they can use their personal influence to win souls. And so you now have major figures who are part of projects that are not necessarily Christian projects, but through their personal testimony, through social media, through news and so forth, they're propagating the gospel. And I think that is another way to look at the entertainment industry for Christians.
Yeah, if you look at their art, even if it's not explicitly stating Jesus' name, I mean, most of the time you see that they're actually creating something that's good or wholesome. And those things were created by God. Anything that's right, anything that's just, anything that's good. And there's nothing wrong with consuming media and preaching the gospel through example, right? But I'm not saying that you shouldn't preach his name, because obviously it's important to get right to the heart of it and really come alongside people and explicitly talk to them about Christ. But, creating something that is just wholesome and good. I mean, look at Soma Games, right? They've created something that doesn't explicitly state Jesus, and people still enjoy it. And then they have their sidearm Tempest Divum, I think it's called. And they, you have all these different branches, like you said, their platform. One more thing I want to mention. I have a coffee cup that actually says the word coffee on it. I didn't buy it, my fiance. And that's kind of a good example, right? People who look at what's in the cup will see that it's coffee. They'll smell that it's coffee. If they taste it, it'll taste like coffee. There's no reason to really write the word coffee on it. It's a coffee cup. But the fact that it's on there, it's not a problem, right?
Well, it's almost like, so that brings up another good point, is that so when you have the coffee cup, no matter what it says on it, you can obviously smell the aroma, and there is an atmosphere around it created by that coffee. You can feel the warmth, you can smell the aroma. And Christians, I get the impression most Christians have no problem admitting that secular content carries spirits and attitudes and mindsets, whether they are I'm trying to think of the word, subvert, I guess would be one of the words, whether it's, hidden or whether it's like right in your face. And so they're very willing to admit that. But I think a lot of Christians forget the fact that the content you create can carry the Spirit of God within it, whether or not it mentions the name of Christ or not.
Yeah, I mean, if it's this way for the secular world, why isn't it this way for the side that actually where it all
exactly
right?
Like if there are stories of people who in secular bands, they would dedicate their albums and CDs and discs to Satan and then sell those out. Tell that to any Christian and they'd be like, I don't want you to have anything to do with it. Why? Because that spirit is carried. Obviously this gets into a whole different discussion, but their mindset is that the spirit is carried through those content. And so why is it a double standard where that doesn't apply to Christian content? If these people are putting the gospel and the inspiration of the Holy Spirit through the content they're creating, why is that not considered inspired as well?
Yeah, it's funny. I keep thinking of the Satan shoes.
Right.
Did you hear about this?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Anyway, I would personally love to see more creative Christians. Just, and I'll preface this by saying I want them to be plugged into community, to be in the Word, to be in prayer, to build prayer, to build their relationship with the Lord every single day. I want them to create more freely because out of them pours the Spirit of God. So naturally, whatever they create, so long as their mind is focused on things above and their heart is being transformed by Jesus, those things aren't going to be, and granted, we're all like being sanctified day by day, right? But ultimately, well, it's two parts, right? Ultimately, it's mostly going to be an outpouring of the Spirit. And when it's not, it provides a platform for discussion and the ability to wrestle through those things as a community, which is the exciting part.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there is a lot of misperception within the Christian world also where not only are we afraid to touch whole art forms, but we're also afraid to touch certain genres because we view these certain genres as inherently evil.
Like horror.
So there's... yeah, exactly. Or hip hop music or rock music. I have this 17-year-old friend of mine. He's a good bit younger, and he's kind of one of those figures I'm mentoring and pouring into. And he goes to this very traditional church, and they run this radio station, and they play like old classic hymns all day long. Like that's all they play. I have no problem with that. If you enjoy that type of music, then by all means, that's great. But it's to the point that, I've chatted with him. I was like, what does your church think about these genres of music and so forth? And it's just kind of like you throw the baby out with the bathwater approach where, if it's not worship music, it's evil. If it's not, with movies, if it's not the Kendrick brothers, it's evil.
I forbid they use drums, okay?
Yeah. There are still churches that don't even want to use drums. But I feel, I did a little bit of searching within the Christian film industry, the top 100 grossing Christian movies of all time. 65% of them are drama films because Christians love drama films. But if you study the top grossing secular movies, very few of them are actually drama films. Most of them are action films, animated films. It's very, very much the last 20 years, Hollywood has drifted towards action films. And that's what people are watching. If you want to minister to people, why don't you create what people are watching? But instead, we're 65% drama films. And we're 90% worship music when people are listening to the biggest genres this year were pop, hip-hop, and R&B. How many good, talented pop, hip-hop, or R&B Christian artists are there? I can count them with the fingers on my right hand.
I wonder how much that has to do with spiritual immaturity. Because when we look at just right under the skin, the idea of conflict, things that conflict with our spiritual state or like our relationship with God, they're usually just relational, right? They're not, and I think there's something to be said about the fact that Christians usually keep drinking milk and they don't go and tackle more complex issues. And also there's more to be said about the fact that we have certain liberties as believers that aren't necessarily salvation issues, that are just wisdom issues. And we have to navigate those separately. And I wonder what would happen if more believers started eating meat and being more communal with each other and discussing these things like we're doing here. And then we can start branching off into these areas where people are actually watching and playing and reading instead of just talking about relationship drama between two people, because it's so uncreative. And I don't mean to put down anyone who's doing that, I just mean to say that you can look in real life and actually see relational drama. That there's nothing, in my personal opinion, I know that this is probably controversial, there's not much that's very creative about that. I as a fantasy writer and game developer who loves sci-fi and fantasy worlds and grew up escaping through them, it just seems lackluster. And it frustrates.
Yeah. Well, because if it's, I feel like if it's set in a fantasy world, how do you preach about Jesus, man? I mean, how?
Well, I mean, C.S.
I'm being sarcastic with.
I was like, wait a minute. People will come against that. They'll say that, C.S. Lewis using allegory and even animals and talking about this alternate Christ and what would it look like if God or Jesus came into this alternate world? Does it even apply? And then they'll discount it. And I think it totally applies. So I'm excited about exploring the same space as him. I'm just not into like anthropomorphic sort of content. Yeah,
everything I think has extremes. And so I don't want people to look at this and think, well, he's the extreme. Everything is okay. Everything is, everything is not okay. Everything is not permissible. As Christians, we have to have guidelines. And I like to think I personally have very high standards of the type of content that Christians should be consuming. Sure. And I'm very disturbed by some of the content that people consume without any second thought. Like Saul. I hear Christians just talking about, I'm not going to say explicitly what I dislike about it because I don't want YouTube to ban this video, but like the movie that just came out, Eternals, and I hear Christians saying, oh, it was a great movie. And I'm like, there's some very anti-biblical content in there right in front of your face, and you're just shutting your eyes to it. And
I refuse to see it. I've seen every Marvel movie ever, and I've seen this progressive degeneration of the ideology in the MCU, where it's going super leftist and all these things. And I'm not a political person.
Too political, yeah.
But it's starting to permeate my life as someone on the outside of it, as someone on the sidelines. So I even I just looked at the promotional material for Eternals, and I won't say too much because I know you might want to monetize the video. So actually, the whole focus was on the diversity, right? On the fact that they were a diverse cast of superheroes. And I think that the problem there was that maybe trumped the actual narrative. And I'm not sure because I haven't seen it, but I probably am not going to.
Well, I mean, I would say the last good MCU movie was Endgame, and then after that, it wasn't really good anymore.
Symbolic.
So
Endgame.
Do what?
It's symbolic. They named it Endgame on purpose.
Yes, no kidding. And that would be a whole different discussion for itself. I believe it's not just a Christian world that's suffering. All of Hollywood, the past several years, in my opinion, has been going downhill because there's a lack of experimentation and creativity anymore. But that's a whole different discussion to itself.
Yeah, just so studios, it's safe to make what works, the formulaic thing, right? That's why indies are so exciting.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how they see it, but I would love to see more creativity. But that's a discussion all to itself. We're now at the 23-minute mark, so I think that's a good little duration right there. But